At 8:42 I was in line at the office cafe debating between black coffee or a triple shot latte. My phone buzzed. Dad calling. He never calls during work hours. I picked up, and his voice cracked on the first word. She's gone. Nate. An hour later, my boss asked me if I was flying out for the funeral or staying to close the biggest deal of our company's year. I told him, I'm doing both. And that decision, it changed everything. Not just for me, but for him too. My name is Nathan Reed, but everyone calls me Nate. I'm 34 years old, and until that Tuesday morning in March, I thought I had my life perfectly mapped out. Senior strategy analyst at Bremer and Lake, one of Chicago's most prestigious financial consulting firms. Corner office on the 37th floor with a view of Lake Michigan that made clients feel like they were already rich just by sitting across from me. For the past 6 years, I'd been climbing the corporate ladder with methodical precision. 70-hour weeks were normal. 80-hour weeks during deal season were expected. I hadn't taken a real vacation in 3 years, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd been home to Tucson to see my parents. My mother, Deborah Reed, had been living in Sunset Manor assisted living for the past 18 months. Early onset Alzheimer's had stolen pieces of her mind gradually, but she'd still light up when I called every Sunday. She'd been a high school Japanese teacher for 32 years before retiring, and even as her memory faded, she could still recite poetry in perfect Japanese and tell me stories about her students who'd gone on to become diplomats and doctors. I'd been promising to visit for months, always next month, always after this big deal, always when things slowed down at work. Things never slowed down at work. Dad's call that morning shattered the careful architecture of excuses I'd built around my absence. Mom had passed peacefully in her sleep. The nurse said, "No pain?" Just slipped away sometime between midnight and dawn, like she was tired of waiting for me to come home. I stood in that cafe line, people behind me sighing impatiently as I held up the queue, and felt something fundamental crack inside my chest. The barista was asking for my order, but all I could hear was the hollow echo of my father's voice saying her name. Deborah. My mother was Deborah again, not Mom, because dead people get their full names back. I bought black coffee and walked back to my office in a daze. The 37th floor of the Bremer and Lake building hummed with its usual controlled chaos. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the soft whoosh of the climate control system that kept everything at a perfect 72 degrees. My assistant, Jennifer, looked up from her computer as I passed. "The Kuroda materials are on your desk," she said. "Richard wants to see you at 10. Richard Lasker was our CEO, a man who'd built Bremer and Lake from a 3-person operation into a $100 million firm over 20 years. He was brilliant, ruthless, and had never met a problem he couldn't solve by throwing money or intimidation at it. I respected him. I also feared him in the way you fear natural disasters, not because they're evil, but because they're forces of nature beyond human reasoning. The Kuroda Holdings deal had been my baby for 8 months. A Japanese manufacturing conglomerate looking to acquire 3 mid-sized American companies and consolidate their operations. The kind of complex, multi-layered transaction that required someone who understood both cultures and could navigate the intricate dance of international business. My mother had taught me basic Japanese when I was a kid. I'd studied it in college and spent a summer in Tokyo during my MBA program. I wasn't fluent, but I could hold conversations and understood the cultural nuances that often made or broke deals with Japanese clients. The preliminary numbers were staggering. $3 million in consulting fees for Bremer and Lake, with potential for ongoing retainer agreements worth another $2 million annually. It would be the biggest deal in the company's history. At 9:47, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard. My office. Now, Richard's corner office was twice the size of mine, with floor-to-ceiling windows that wrapped around 2 walls. He was standing with his back to me, looking out at the city, when I knocked and entered. "Kuroda moved the meeting," he said without turning around. 3 o'clock today instead of Friday." I felt the coffee turn to acid in my stomach. "Today?" "Kuroda Kenta is flying back to Tokyo tomorrow morning. His father wants this wrapped up before he leaves." Richard turned to face me, his steel-gray eyes assessing my expression. "This is it. Nate, 8 months of work comes down to the next 6 hours. I took a breath. Richard, I need to tell you something. He waited. My mother passed away this morning. I need to fly to Arizona for the funeral. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Richard's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Calculation. The same look he got when examining balance sheets. I'm sorry for your loss, he said finally. The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced expressing condolences in a mirror. When's the funeral? Thursday afternoon. So you could make the Kuroda meeting today and still fly out tomorrow night. The meeting will run late. You know how these things go. There'll be dinner, drinks, relationship building. I need to be there for my father, Richard. I need to help with arrangements. Richard walked back to his desk and sat down. He picked up a crystal paperweight, a gift from some grateful client, and turned it over in his hands. Nate, I'm going to be straight with you. If you're not in that conference room at 3 o'clock today, don't bother coming back. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been with Bremer and Lake for 6 years. I'd brought in over $20 million in revenue. I'd worked weekends, holidays, missed birthdays and anniversaries and family gatherings. Are you serious? Dead serious. He set the paperweight down with a soft click. I understand you're grieving. I understand this is difficult, but business doesn't stop for personal tragedy. Kuroda Holdings represents our future. Your future. If you walk away from this meeting, you're walking away from everything we've built together. I stood there for a moment, watching him. Richard had built his empire by making impossible choices and living with the consequences. He'd divorced 2 wives, missed his own children's graduations, sacrificed everything personal on the altar of professional success. I see, I said quietly. I hope you do. Richard opened his laptop, already moving on to the next crisis. The meeting's in conference room A. I'll handle the introductions, but the presentation is yours. Don't let me down. Nate. I walked back to my office with my mind racing. 6 years of my life. 6 years of believing that loyalty and hard work would be rewarded with understanding and flexibility when it mattered most. I sat at my desk and stared at the Kuroda presentation on my computer screen. 47 slides of financial projections, market analysis, and strategic recommendations. The culmination of months of research and relationship building. But underneath the main presentation folder, buried in a subfolder labeled Alternative Scenarios, was something else. Something I'd been working on for the past 2 months during evenings and weekends. A different approach to the Kuroda deal. One that Richard would never approve. The original plan called for Kuroda to acquire the 3 American companies and immediately consolidate operations by closing 2 of the manufacturing facilities and laying off approximately 400 workers. The savings from eliminated salaries and redundant infrastructure would boost profit margins by 23% within the first year. It was efficient. It was profitable. It was exactly what Richard expected. But it was also exactly the kind of ruthless cost-cutting that my mother had spent her career teaching her students to question. She'd grown up during World War II, had seen what happened when people became numbers on spreadsheets instead of human beings with families and dreams. The alternative model I'd developed maintained profitability while preserving jobs, instead of closing facilities. Kuroda would invest in upgrading equipment and training workers for higher value manufacturing. The profit margins would be lower in the short term, but more sustainable over 5 to 10 years. It also eliminated the public relations nightmare of mass layoffs and the potential for union backlash. I'd run the numbers dozens of times. The alternative approach would generate slightly less immediate profit, but create a stronger, more resilient long-term operation. It was the kind of thinking my mother would have approved of. I pulled up my contact list and found Becca Martinez, our head of marketing. If anyone could help me navigate the next few hours, it would be her. Becca, it's Nate. Can you meet me in conference room C in 5 minutes? I need a favor. Becca had joined Bremer and Lake 2 years ago after a successful career at a tech startup that had been acquired by Google. She was smart, resourceful, and one of the few people in the company who seemed to understand that business success didn't require sacrificing your soul. I found her waiting in the small conference room, laptop open, fingers drumming on the table. What's going on, Nate? You sounded strange on the phone. I closed the door and sat across from her. My mother died this morning. Her expression immediately softened. Oh God, Nate. I'm so sorry. Richard told me if I'm not here for the Kuroda meeting at 3, I shouldn't bother coming back. Becca's eyes flashed with anger. He said what? I need to be at that funeral, Becca. But I also can't let 8 months of work go down the drain. I leaned forward. I have an idea, but I need your help. She studied my face. What kind of idea? The kind that could get us both fired. I'm listening. I explained my plan. It was risky, complicated, and required precise timing. It also required Becca to lie to Richard and potentially jeopardize her own career. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You're absolutely insane, she said finally. Probably. Richard will explode when he finds out. Maybe. The Kuroda executives might think we're completely unprofessional. It's possible. She closed her laptop and looked at me directly. When do we start? The next 3 hours passed in a blur of preparation and coordination. While Richard was in back-to-back meetings, Becca worked her magic with the building's tech support to set up a secure video conference link in Conference Room B, 2 floors down from where Richard expected the meeting to happen. I transferred all the Kuroda files to my personal laptop and modified my presentation to include the alternative proposal. Instead of leading with the cost-cutting approach, I would present both options and let the Kuroda executives choose. It was a massive gamble. Richard would be furious. The clients might be confused by having choices when they expected a single recommendation, but something deep in my chest, something that sounded like my mother's voice, told me it was the right thing to do. At 2:15, I slipped out of the building and caught a taxi to O'Hare Airport. My flight to Tucson left at 4:30. If everything went according to plan, I would be 30,000 feet above Kansas when the meeting officially started. The taxi driver, a middle-aged man with a Chicago Bears sticker on his dashboard, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Business trip? Funeral, I said. Sorry to hear that. Someone close? My mother. He nodded and turned up the radio. We drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence. At the airport, I found a quiet corner near my gate and called Becca. Status report? Richard is pacing around Conference Room A like a caged animal. The Kuroda team arrived 15 minutes ago. I told them there was a last-minute change of venue due to construction noise and escorted them to Conference Room B. And Richard? Still waiting in Conference Room A. I may have accidentally given him the wrong room number. I felt a grin tug at the corners of my mouth. You're evil, Becca. I'm learning from the best. Are you ready? I opened my laptop and connected to the airport Wi-Fi. The video conference link showed 3 faces in Conference Room B: Kuroda Hiroshi, the 70-year-old chairman and founder of Kuroda Holdings, his son Kenta, who served as the company's international operations director, and their interpreter, a young woman named Yuki. As ready as I'll ever be. At exactly 3 p.m., I clicked the video conference link and appeared on the large screen in Conference Room B. The 3 Japanese executives looked surprised to see me calling in remotely, but Kenta smiled and gave a slight bow. Reed-san, he said in accented English, unexpected to see you this way. Is everything okay? I took a breath. This was the moment of truth. Kuroda-san, I want to begin by apologizing for the unusual circumstances of this meeting. I am currently at Chicago O'Hare Airport, about to board a flight to Arizona. My mother passed away this morning, and I am traveling to attend her funeral. The interpreter quickly translated for Chairman Kuroda, whose expression grew more serious. When she finished, he spoke in rapid Japanese. My father expresses his condolences for your loss. Yuki translated. He says that honoring one's parents is the most important duty. Thank you. Your father's kindness means a great deal to me. I paused, gathering my courage for what came next. I want to be completely transparent with you about something else. My CEO, Richard Lasker, does not know I am calling you from the airport. He expected me to choose between attending my mother's funeral and presenting to you today. I have decided to do both. Another rapid exchange in Japanese. Kenta leaned forward, his expression curious rather than angry. This is highly unusual. Reed-san, why would you take such a risk? Because 8 months ago, when we first met, you told me that Kuroda Holdings was founded on the principle of treating workers like family. You said your father started the company because he wanted to create jobs that would allow people to support their families with dignity. Chairman Kuroda nodded slowly as Yuki translated, I have spent the past 8 months developing what I believed was the best strategy for your American acquisitions. But in the past 2 months, I have also developed an alternative approach, one that I believe better reflects the values your father built this company on. I launched into my presentation, explaining both options in detail. The first approach, Richard's preferred strategy, focused on immediate cost savings through consolidation and layoffs. The second maintained employment while investing in worker training and equipment upgrades. As I spoke, I watched the three faces on my screen carefully. Chairman Kuroda's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were sharp and attentive. Kenta took notes on a tablet. Yuki translated efficiently, her voice maintaining the formal tone appropriate for the business discussion. When I finished, the conference room fell silent. Chairman Kuroda spoke quietly to his son in Japanese. Their conversation lasted several minutes while I waited, watching passengers board my flight through the terminal windows. Finally, Kenta looked directly into the camera. Reed-san, my father has a question. He wants to know why you developed the second approach when your company clearly preferred the first. I thought about my mother, about the stories she used to tell about her students, about the lessons she'd tried to teach me about treating people with dignity, even when it wasn't the most profitable approach. Because my mother was a teacher, I said. She taught high school Japanese for 32 years. She used to say that the measure of a business wasn't how much money it made, but how many families it supported. She believed that when you take care of people, they take care of you. Another long conversation in Japanese. I could hear the boarding announcement for my flight in the background. Finally, Chairman Kuroda looked directly at the camera and spoke in careful English. Your mother, she sounds like wise woman. Very wise. He paused, choosing his words carefully. In Japan, we have a concept called ningen-sei. It means humanity in business. To remember that behind every number is person with family, with dreams. He said something to Yuki, who nodded and pulled out a document. Chairman Kuroda would like to proceed with your second proposal, she said. He believes it better reflects the kind of partnership Kuroda Holdings wants to build in America. I felt my knees go weak with relief. Thank you. I promise you won't regret this decision. Kenta smiled. Reed-san, my father also wants you to know that he is very impressed by your dedication to both your family obligations and your professional responsibilities. This shows strong character. There is one more thing, Chairman Kuroda added in his careful English. When you return from honoring your mother, we would like to discuss expanding our business relationship. Perhaps Kuroda Holdings could use a consultant who understands both profit and ningen-sei. The gate agent was making the final boarding call for my flight. I quickly exchanged contact information with the Kuroda team and promised to send the formal contract documents within 24 hours. As I ended the video call and rushed toward the gate, my phone started buzzing with text messages from Richard. The first few were merely urgent. By the 10th message, they had escalated to threats. Where the hell are you? The Kuroda team is asking for you specifically. If you sabotage this deal, you're finished. I don't know what game you're playing, but it ends now. You have 30 minutes to get back here, or you're fired. I turned off my phone and boarded the plane. The flight to Tucson gave me 3 hours to think about what I'd just done. I had possibly destroyed my career at Bremer and Lake, but I had also potentially secured the biggest deal in the company's history. I had honored my mother's memory by choosing a business approach she would have approved of, while also fulfilling my professional obligations. Most importantly, I had refused to accept that I had to choose between my family and my career. Instead, I had found a third option. When I landed in Tucson, I had 17 missed calls from Richard and 43 text messages. I also had 3 emails from the Kuroda team confirming the details of our agreement and expressing their condolences for my loss. My father picked me up at the airport. He looked older than I remembered, diminished by grief, but trying to stay strong for the arrangements that still needed to be made. How was work? he asked as we drove through the desert toward the house where I'd grown up. Complicated, I said, but I think Mom would have been proud. The funeral was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at Desert Winds Presbyterian Church, where my mother had played piano for the children's choir every Sunday for 15 years. The service was simple but beautiful, filled with stories from her former students and colleagues who remembered her kindness, her dedication, and her unwavering belief that education could change the world. I gave the eulogy, talking about the lessons she'd taught me both in childhood and through her example as an adult. I told the gathered mourners about the business decision I'd made the day she died, choosing to honor her values even when it meant risking my career. Deborah Reed believed that how we treat people matters more than how much money we make. I said, she believed that success without humanity is just sophisticated failure, and she believed that when life forces you to choose between two impossible options, the answer is usually to find a third way. After the service, as people shared memories and condolences over coffee and sandwiches in the church fellowship hall, I stepped outside to check my phone. I had 2 emails that would change everything. The first was from Kenta Kuroda, sent from his father's personal email account. Dear Reed-san, my father was very impressed by your presentation yesterday and your commitment to both family and business excellence. After much discussion with our board of directors, we would like to invite you to consider a consulting partnership with Kuroda Holdings. We are expanding our operations throughout Asia and North America and need someone who understands both cultures and shares our commitment to Ningansei. The position would be based in Tokyo with frequent travel to our international offices, including a new facility we are planning in Chicago. The compensation package would be competitive with senior executive positions at major consulting firms. More importantly, you would have the freedom to develop business strategies that reflect both profitability and humanity. Please consider this offer carefully. We believe you could help us build something meaningful. With respect and sympathy for your loss, Kuroda Kenta. The second email was from Margaret Thompson, the Vice Chair of Bremer and Lake's Board of Directors. Nathan, I am writing to inform you that Richard Lasker has been placed on administrative leave pending a board review of his management practices. Several employees have come forward with concerns about his leadership style and decision-making process. The board has been particularly troubled by reports of his ultimatum regarding your attendance at your mother's funeral. Such behavior is completely contrary to the values this company was founded on. We would like you to return to Chicago at your earliest convenience to discuss your future with Bremer and Lake. We are prepared to offer you the position of Senior Vice President of International Operations, with a significant salary increase and equity stake in the company. We hope you will consider staying with us as we work to rebuild our corporate culture around the values of both excellence and compassion. Please accept our condolences for your loss. Your mother would be proud of the integrity you showed in an impossible situation. Sincerely, Margaret Thompson. I stood in the desert heat outside the church where my mother's life had been celebrated, holding 2 offers that represented completely different futures. Both were generous. Both recognized the value of what I had accomplished. Both offered the kind of professional success I had been working toward for years. But neither felt like the right answer. Over the next 2 days, as I helped my father sort through my mother's belongings and make arrangements for her estate, I found myself thinking about a conversation we'd had during my last phone call with her. It was one of her lucid moments, when the fog of Alzheimer's lifted and she was completely present. Nathan, she had said, I'm proud of how successful you've become, but I worry that you're building someone else's dream instead of your own. What do you mean, Mom? You're so good at solving other people's problems, making other people rich, but what would you build if you were building it for yourself? What would you create if you knew it was going to outlast you? I had dismissed the question at the time, telling her I was happy with my career trajectory. But now, sitting in her empty apartment, surrounded by boxes of books and photo albums and letters from former students who still wrote to thank her for changing their lives, I understood what she had been trying to tell me. On Friday evening, I called Becca from my father's kitchen. Nate, thank God, I've been worried sick. How are you holding up? I'm okay. The funeral was beautiful. My dad's doing as well as can be expected. I paused. How are things at the office? Complete chaos. Richard has been suspended. The board is conducting interviews with everyone who worked closely with him. And the Kuroda deal? It's the talk of the entire company. Everyone wants to know how you managed to close it from an airport bathroom. It wasn't a bathroom. It was a very respectable seating area near Gate B7. She laughed, and the sound was like medicine for my grief-worn heart. Becca, I need to ask you something. Hypothetically, if someone were to start their own consulting firm focused on ethical business practices and sustainable growth strategies, would you know anyone crazy enough to join them? The line was quiet for a moment. Hypothetically, she said finally, I would know someone who's been waiting her entire career for an opportunity like that, even if it meant leaving a secure job at an established firm. Especially if it meant leaving a secure job at an established firm. Nate, what are you thinking? I told her about the 2 job offers. I told her about my mother's question about building something that would outlast me. I told her about an idea that had been forming in my mind as I sat in that church, listening to stories about a teacher who had changed hundreds of lives simply by treating her students with dignity and respect. I want to start something new. I said, Reed Ethical Capital, a consulting firm that helps companies grow sustainably while treating their workers and communities like human beings instead of line items on a balance sheet. That's a beautiful idea, Nate, but how would we compete with the big firms? We wouldn't compete with them. We'd offer something they can't. Companies like Kuroda Holdings are tired of consultants who only care about quarterly profits. They want partners who understand that long-term success requires treating people well. You really think there's a market for that? I know there is. The Kuroda deal proved it. Chairman Kuroda chose the more expensive option because it aligned with his values. There are other executives out there making the same calculations. Over the weekend, Becca and I sketched out a business plan via email and phone calls. By Sunday night, we had identified our first 5 potential clients, mapped out a basic service offering, and calculated startup costs. On Monday morning, I sent polite decline letters to both Margaret Thompson and Kenta Kuroda, thanking them for their generous offers, but explaining that I had decided to start my own firm. Both responses were gracious. Margaret wished me well and suggested we stay in touch about potential collaboration opportunities. Kenta's reply was more intriguing. Reed-san, my father and I are not surprised by your decision. We suspected you might choose to build something of your own. Kuroda Holdings would be honored to be the first client of Reed Ethical Capital. When can we schedule our first official meeting? I called my father to tell him about my decision. Your mother would be proud, he said. She always said you had too much integrity to work for someone else forever. I'm scared. Dad, I'm walking away from everything I've built. No, son, you're building on everything you've learned. There's a difference. Reed Ethical Capital officially launched 6 weeks later in a small office space in downtown Chicago. Our first employee was Becca, who left Bremer and Lake to become our vice president of client relations. Our second employee was my younger brother Marcus, an environmental engineer who specialized in sustainable manufacturing processes. Our first client was Kuroda Holdings. Our second was a mid-sized manufacturing company in Wisconsin whose CEO had heard about our approach through industry contacts. By the end of our first year, we had 12 clients and were turning away business because we couldn't grow fast enough to meet demand. The secret to our success wasn't complicated. We simply offered what every other consulting firm claimed to offer but rarely delivered. Solutions that made companies more profitable while making their communities stronger. We helped a textile company in North Carolina modernize their operations without laying off workers by retraining employees for higher skilled positions. We assisted a tech startup in Austin develop a growth strategy that included profit sharing with all employees. We worked with an agricultural cooperative in Iowa implement sustainable farming practices that reduced costs while improving crop yields. Every project was different, but they all shared a common thread: the recognition that businesses succeed when they treat people like human beings rather than expendable resources. 3 years after that morning when I chose between my mother's funeral and the Kuroda deal. Reed Ethical Capital was featured on the cover of Harvard Business Review under the headline, "The New Capitalism: How Ethical Consulting is Reshaping Corporate America." The article quoted Chairman Kuroda extensively. Reed-san showed us that we did not have to choose between profit and principle. He said, His approach has made our American operations more successful than we ever imagined. I keep a framed copy of that magazine cover in my office, next to a photo of my mother standing in front of her classroom, surrounded by students who are now doctors and teachers and business leaders scattered across the world. Sometimes potential clients ask me how I had the courage to risk my career on an untested business model. I tell them about that moment in the airport when I realized I didn't have to accept the false choice between family and work, between values and success, between doing the right thing and doing the profitable thing. I tell them about my mother, who spent her career proving that when you treat people with dignity and respect, they exceed every expectation. I tell them about Chairman Kuroda, who taught me that the best businesses are built on the foundation of Ningsei, humanity in commerce. But mostly, I tell them what I learned that day at 30,000 feet, flying toward my mother's funeral while closing the biggest deal of my career. When people force you to choose between two things that both matter, the real answer is usually to find a third option that honors both. I didn't choose between my mother's funeral and my career. I chose to rewrite the rules entirely. I chose to build something that would have made her proud. I chose to prove that success doesn't require sacrificing your soul. It requires having the courage to define success on your own terms. When people force you to choose between two impossible things, sometimes the only way forward is to create a third path that makes both possible.